The archive basement was a place even the dust seemed to have forgotten. Rows of wooden shelves sagged under the weight of centuries, their contents entombed in parchment and leather. It was here, among the brittle manuscripts and the oppressive stillness, that Eleanor Voss made her living. She was an archivist in the truest sense, quiet, deliberate, invisible to most of the world. And that was precisely how she liked it. On that grey afternoon, the single bulb above her workspace flickered, casting long shadows that made the cramped room feel like a crypt. She had been cataloguing a neglected collection of monastic records from the 14th century, each page smelling faintly of mildew and candle soot. As her gloved hands lifted a warped ledger from the bottom of a crate, something unexpected slid loose and landed on the desk with a soft thud. It wasn't paper, not exactly. The texture was rougher, the weight heavier. When she unrolled it, the first thing she noticed was the color, a deep, uneven brown that had sunk into the fibers in erratic smears. The edges were frayed, as though mice or time itself had tried to erase it. But it was the stains that stopped her breath. They were too dark, too irregular to be ink. She leaned closer, bringing her face just above the surface. The smell was faint but metallic, like rust, the kind of scent she knew from history, from stories of battlefields and martyrdom. Her fingertips trembled slightly as she traced the faint outlines of a hand-drawn coastline, the curling loops of script labeling unfamiliar ports and roads. And then she saw it, a symbol at the center of the map, a small stylized chalice drawn in gold pigment that had somehow resisted centuries of decay. The air felt heavier. Eleanor was not prone to dramatics, but her training told her she was looking at something extraordinary. The cartography was medieval, perhaps early 13th century, and the script bore the flourishes of Latin shorthand. Beside the chalice, written in a deeper red than the rest, was a single phrase, Sanctum Aureum, the golden sanctuary. 1,000 questions rattled in her head. Why was this map hidden among unrelated monastic records? Why the stains? Blood, perhaps, on such a carefully drawn artifact? And most importantly, why had no one seen it before her? Eleanor's mind leapt back to a story her mentor once told. A whisper of an unverified legend about a Crusader reliquary lost in the chaos of the Levant. Supposedly forged from gold and encrusted with relics stolen from Constantinople, it had been carried by a knight of the Third Crusade. But the knight, nameless in most tellings, had vanished, his trail ending abruptly in the records. Only rumors remained that he had been betrayed by his own order, and that his treasure had been sealed away where no king or pope could ever reach it. She swallowed hard, the musty air catching in her throat. A rational archivist would have logged the map, tagged it for preservation, and sent it up the chain to be studied by experts. But Eleanor's instincts, and perhaps something more primal, told her not to. Not yet. She wanted to know its story before the bureaucracy smothered it in reports and restrictions. Carefully, she placed the map in a fresh archival sleeve, sealing it as though she were guarding a life. Her heart was uncharacteristically fast. In all her years among manuscripts, she had never felt this way, as if the parchment itself were breathing, waiting. Upstairs, the library's old clock chimed 5 times, its hollow tone echoing through the building. She gathered her tools, tucked the map into her leather satchel, and locked the basement door behind her. The world outside was dimming into evening, the autumn air sharp with the scent of rain. She didn't notice the man sitting in the corner of the reading room as she passed through. His eyes followed her, steady and unblinking, until she stepped into the street. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of Sir Aldric's life. The rain began to fall in slow, deliberate drops, as if the sky were warning her. She pulled her coat tighter and glanced once over her shoulder. The street was empty. For now. The next morning, Eleanor arrived earlier than usual, her satchel pressed close against her side as though it contained something fragile enough to shatter with a whisper. She had barely slept, the image of the map replaying in her mind again and again. The deep brown stains, the chalice rendered in gold pigment, the ominous phrase, "Sanctum Aureum." The basement smelled even more of damp stone today, the kind of scent that clung to old buildings in autumn. She spread the map out carefully beneath a low desk lamp, letting the light glide across its uneven surface. That's when she noticed something she hadn't seen in the dim glow the night before. Along the bottom edge, half hidden beneath a water stain, was a name. It was written in dark, faded red, almost black now, and in a script that seemed rushed, as though the writer had been in fear for his life. Aldric de Montfort. Her breath caught. Aldric de Montfort was not a name you encountered casually. In scattered Crusader accounts, he was described as a French knight, devout, cunning, and, if the rumours were to be believed, exiled in disgrace after defying his order's Grand Master. Some chronicles painted him as a traitor, others as a guardian of a dangerous secret. The accounts always ended abruptly, as though someone had been determined to erase him from history. Her fingers itched to turn to the library's restricted stacks, where only those with clearance could consult certain manuscripts. She knew exactly which volume might mention him. A 15th-century codex bound in dark leather, written by a monk whose fascination with the Crusades had skirted the boundaries of heresy. Eleanor moved quietly, her flats making no sound on the polished floor as she entered the restricted room. The scent of vellum and iron gall ink was stronger here, almost intoxicating. She found the codex and carried it to a secluded desk, her pulse quickening as she flipped to the section she remembered. There it was. Aldricus de Montforti, Custodem Sancti Vasculi Aurae, Guardian of the Holy Golden Vessel. The text described a night during the Siege of Acre, when Aldric was entrusted with an object too sacred for mortal hands. It hinted at betrayal, at blood spilt upon the very map that would keep it safe. And then the words abruptly ended, the parchment torn clean across the page. Eleanor sat back, her mind spinning. The blood-stained map in her possession wasn't just a relic, it was possibly the map, the very one Aldric had bled on as he fled from his pursuers. The thought sent a ripple of unease through her. She was holding not just a historical artifact, but the last surviving witness to a violent and unfinished story. She began sketching notes, writing down every scrap of information before the details could fade. That's when she felt it, the distinct sensation of being watched. Slowly, she glanced up. Through the narrow glass of the reading room door, a man in a charcoal coat stood motionless. His hair was cropped short, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He didn't flinch when she met his gaze. If anything, his lips curved slightly, as though he'd been waiting for her to notice. Eleanor closed the codex and locked it back in its cabinet with a controlled, deliberate calm. She knew the rules. You never confront someone directly in a place like this. Instead, she gathered her notes and the map, slipping them into her satchel. She walked out through the opposite end of the library, the sound of her own heartbeat thudding in her ears. Outside, the air was colder, carrying the metallic tang of rain. She quickened her pace, weaving through the narrow streets toward her apartment. Every so often she glanced behind her. No one was there. But the sensation clung to her like a shadow. That night, she placed the map on her desk at home, staring at the name in red ink until the letters seemed to pulse. Aldric de Montfort, a knight erased from history, except, perhaps, by her hands. She didn't know yet if she had found him, or if he had found her. By the third day, Eleanor's resolve had shifted from curiosity to obsession. She no longer cared about her usual duties, the cataloguing of parish records, the endless preservation work. All of it felt like meaningless busywork compared to the weight of the map now hidden in her flat. Every spare moment was spent poring over her notes, cross-referencing the fragments of Aldric's life with Crusader chronicles and obscure travelogues from the late 12th century. It was during one of these searches in the library's dim microfilm room that she came across the reference that changed everything. A footnote in an obscure 19th century history journal. It spoke of Ordo Aurae Custodes, the Order of the Golden Keepers, an offshoot of the Knights Templar whose members had sworn their lives to guard a relic born in Constantinople, carried into Jerusalem, and hidden forever after. The article, written by a French historian dismissed by his peers as a fantasist, included a chilling detail. According to a single surviving parchment in a monastery in Provence, the order's oath bound them not only to guard the relic, but to kill anyone, even fellow knights, who threatened its secrecy. Betrayal within their ranks was punishable not by trial, but by immediate execution. Eleanor's fingers hovered over the microfilm controls. The words on the screen felt like they were burning into her eyes. The last known keeper, Aldric de Montfort, was hunted for treachery by his brothers. His trail vanishes near the walls of Acre the night before the city fell. She sat back, the whir of the microfilm machine loud in the silence. If the blood on her map really was Aldric's, it meant the Order had caught him, or almost had. Either way, the stains weren't just relics of violence. They were the final trace of a man who had been running for his life. For the first time, she wondered if finding the reliquary was even something she should do. Objects like that weren't just historical treasures. They were lightning rods. Museums fought over them. Collectors paid fortunes for them. Wars had been started for less. And if there truly was an unbroken line of golden keepers sworn to protect it. Her thoughts froze as the faintest sound reached her. The creak of the library's wooden floorboards in the hallway outside the microfilm room. Eleanor leaned slightly, catching a shadow moving just beyond the frosted glass. It was too deliberate to be a passing librarian. She switched off the machine, the room plunging into a dim blue haze. Sliding her notes into her satchel, she waited, listening. Footsteps retreated slowly, almost mockingly, as if to remind her that whoever it was had no need to hurry. That evening, in the safety of her small apartment, she laid out the map once more. The candlelight caught the gold pigment of the chalice, making it shimmer as though it were freshly painted. She stared at it, thinking of the men who had drawn it, bled on it, died for it. A sudden impulse gripped her. She reached for a magnifying lens and began inspecting the edges of the stains more closely. And there, embedded in one of the darker smears, she saw something minute and unexpected. A fleck of crushed mineral pigment, the kind used in medieval illuminations. It was lapis lazuli, imported from Afghanistan, rarer than gold in Aldric's time. Her mind raced. Why would blood and lapis be on the same surface unless the map had been created, sealed, or hidden in a sacred context, perhaps even inside a church or monastery? The pieces began to align. The reliquary wasn't simply treasure, it was almost certainly a container for something of immense religious significance, perhaps a relic from the very heart of Christendom. And if the keepers had hidden it, there was a reason it had never been found. A knock shattered her thoughts. It was sharp, deliberate, and far too late for polite visitors. She froze, her breath shallow. The knock came again, slower this time. When she finally moved toward the door, she did so without a sound, pressing her ear to the wood. On the other side, there was only silence. But she knew, absolutely knew, she was no longer the only one hunting for the golden reliquary. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She sat in her armchair by the window, watching the empty street below until the sky began to pale. The knock on her door still echoed in her mind, each slow rap like a measured warning. She tried to tell herself it could have been a neighbor, a lost tourist, a delivery to the wrong flat. But deep down, she knew better. Whoever had been outside her door hadn't been lost. They had been listening. By morning, the exhaustion only sharpened her nerves. She packed the map into a reinforced document tube, hiding it beneath layers of clothing in her satchel. Today, she decided, she would take the research to the next level. And that meant finding the one place in the city where whispers about dangerous relics sometimes slipped into the open, the antiquarian reading room. The reading room was tucked at the back of the main library, a cavernous hall lit by tall, arched windows. Dust floated in slow spirals through the beams of sunlight, settling on oak tables worn smooth by decades of elbows and quills. It was a place where scholars of questionable credibility shared space with collectors whose fortunes were built on objects they couldn't legally own. She had barely stepped inside when she felt it again, the prickle at the back of her neck. Someone was watching. At a far table, the man in the charcoal coat from earlier sat pretending to read a bound volume. This time, Eleanor looked at him directly. His eyes lifted from the page, meeting hers without hesitation. It wasn't an accident. He wanted her to know he was there. Eleanor forced herself to move with the unhurried grace of someone who had nothing to hide. She found a table in the far corner, away from the shelves, and unpacked a stack of decoy documents. Harmless city ledgers, maps of trade routes, inventories from minor monasteries. The real work she kept in her lap, hidden beneath the table. A thin man with silver hair and a librarian's badge approached. "Miss Voss," he said quietly. "You'll want to be cautious with certain manuscripts. Not everything here welcomes daylight." She glanced up sharply. "You know who I am?" He smiled faintly. "We all do in here. The basement archivist who doesn't ask for permission." Her mouth went dry. "And what is it you think I'm looking for?" Instead of answering, he slipped a small slip of paper onto the table. It had only a name and an address, a street near the Old Port, known for its antique shops and seedy pawn houses. "Go there," he said softly, "but if you value your life, go in daylight." Before she could speak, he moved away, vanishing into the maze of shelves. Eleanor glanced toward the man in the charcoal coat. He was gone. That evening, she locked the map away in its tube and tried to focus on ordinary tasks. Boiling pasta, answering work emails, watering her single wilting fern. But her mind was elsewhere. The name on that slip of paper burned in her thoughts, the address pulling at her like gravity. By the time she lay down, her decision was already made. But before she drifted into uneasy dreams, she saw something that set her heart pounding. A shadow stretching across her window from the streetlight outside, holding still for just a little too long before fading away. Someone was waiting. The street near the old port smelled of brine and diesel, its cobblestones slick from the morning tide. Eleanor kept her satchel close, one hand wrapped around the strap, the other deep in her coat pocket. The slip of paper in her fist had grown damp from her grip, the name and address pressing into her skin like a brand. She found the building wedged between a shuttered fishmonger and a pawn shop displaying tarnished silverware in its dusty window. The door was oak, its paint peeling, a small brass bell dangling just above the frame. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. No one obvious was following her, but she had stopped trusting appearances days ago. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of old leather and pipe smoke. Shelves groaned under the weight of books, maps, and relics of uncertain origin. A tall man emerged from behind a counter, his white shirt rolled to the elbows, revealing arms corded with sinew despite his age. "You're late," he said. His voice was deep, with the faint rasp of a smoker. "I wasn't aware I had an appointment," Eleanor replied, her tone measured. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes dropping to the satchel at her side. "You brought it." She didn't bother pretending. "Who told you about the map?" "No one needed to. That sort of thing makes its own noise." He motioned her toward a back room, where a large table was strewn with magnifying lenses, parchment scraps, and jars of pigment. In the center sat a single leather-bound volume, its edges gnawed by centuries. "This," he said, tapping the cover, "is the Chronicle of Brother Mathieu. He wrote of a reliquary made in the workshops of Constantinople, gifted to the Knights Templar before the Fourth Crusade. He said it contained fragments of the true cross, and that the Order of the Golden Keepers swore to protect it until the Last Judgment." Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. "And Aldric de Montfort?" The man's expression hardened. "The last recorded keeper. Betrayed by his own men, they say he bled onto the very map you carry, marking it with his death as surely as if it were a signature." Her mouth was dry. "Do you know where it leads?" He leaned back in his chair. "I know where it starts, and I know the path ends in a walled city in the Levant. Most of it is ruins now, swallowed by the desert. But the reliquary, that's another matter." Eleanor reached for the map, laying it gently on the table. The man's eyes narrowed as he examined the stains, the gold chalice, the faint name in red ink. "Yes," he murmured, "this is no reproduction." He pulled a magnifying glass closer. "Here," he said, pointing to a jagged line along the coast. "This isn't coastline at all. It's a wall. And this mark," he tapped a small black dot, "isn't a town. It's a gate. The gate of the betrayer. The only entrance Aldric could have taken if he was being hunted." The room seemed smaller now, the air heavier. Eleanor imagined the desert sun blazing over a ruined fortress, the wind carrying the scent of dust and death. She also imagined the man in the charcoal coat, waiting at some invisible distance, letting her do all the work before stepping in to claim the prize. The older man rolled the map back into its tube and handed it to her. "If you go there, you will not be alone," he said. "The keepers may be shadows now, but shadows are patient. They wait until you've done the digging. Then they take the gold from your hands." Outside, the harbour wind whipped her hair as she stepped into the street. Somewhere behind her, a doorbell jingled, but she didn't turn to see who had entered. She already knew. The Levant was a place where history clung to the air like heat, where the wind could carry both the scent of the sea and the ghost of a crusader's last breath. Eleanor stood at the edge of the old fortress, the sun sinking behind its jagged walls. Sand hissed against the stone like whispers from the past. The journey here had been a blur, a flight to Beirut, a rattling bus along coastal roads, then a hired jeep that carried her into the desert's teeth. Each step felt watched. In airport queues, in the market streets, she had sensed him, the man in the charcoal coat, always just far enough away to make pursuit impossible, close enough to make his presence felt. Now, before her, rose what the old map had promised, a wall of sandstone the colour of dried blood, scarred by centuries of siege. The gate of the betrayer stood in the centre, its arch sagging but intact. The name seemed almost too poetic, until she stepped through and saw the narrow passage beyond. Here, a man could be trapped easily. A knight chased into the shadows with his blood marking the ground. Inside the ruins, silence reigned. Her boots crunched over gravel, disturbing lizards that darted into the cracks. The air smelled of dust and something faintly metallic. She followed the map's markings closely, tracing turns and angles through the fortress's skeleton, until she reached a small chamber carved into the rock. It was there she found it. Not the reliquary itself, but a chest of dark wood, banded with iron and locked with a mechanism that bore the sigil of the chalice. Kneeling, Eleanor ran her fingers along the edges, feeling the grooves worn smooth by centuries. Her mind replayed everything she had learned. Aldric de Montfort, bleeding into the map, the Order of the Golden Keepers, sworn to protect the relic, the lapis fleck in the stain. If this chest contained what she suspected, she was about to open the last page of a story sealed for more than 800 years. A sound behind her froze her hand. "Step away," a voice said, calm, measured, but threaded with steel. She turned slowly. The man in the charcoal coat stood framed in the doorway, the sinking light at his back. In his hands was not a weapon, but the kind of quiet authority that made one unnecessary. "You've done well," he said. "Better than most. But this is where your part ends." Her mind raced. "You're a keeper." He didn't answer directly. "Some truths aren't meant for daylight." He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the chest. "The reliquary is not gold to be sold, nor a relic to be displayed. It is dangerous. That's why Aldric died for it. That's why you will walk away now." Eleanor's pulse thundered in her ears. She could feel the weight of the centuries pressing on this moment, the choice between knowledge and survival. She thought of the map in her satchel, the bloodstains, the way history had tried to bury Aldric. "No," she said quietly. "Some truths belong to everyone." For a moment they stood locked in silence, two guardians of different kinds of faith. Then his eyes softened. Not with mercy, but with a kind of weary respect. "If you open it," he said, "you will carry its burden until it kills you." She reached for the lock. The mechanism clicked. The chest creaked open, and what lay inside was not gold, but something far older, wrapped in linen so brittle it crumbled at her touch. She knew instantly that the world would never see it the same way again. The linen disintegrated in her hands, revealing an object so small and unassuming that Eleanor almost laughed. A wooden box, no larger than a man's palm, its surface blackened with age. Yet even before she touched it, she felt the heat of its history radiating upward, as though it had absorbed centuries of fevered prayers. The man in the charcoal coat stepped forward, his voice quieter now. "You don't know what you're holding." She ignored him, running her fingertips over the faint carvings that curled across the box's surface. Beneath the grime, she could just make out a cross etched in gold leaf, worn thin by time. The clasp was simple, no ornate lock, no hidden mechanism, just a peg of ivory, yellowed to the colour of old bone. When she lifted it free, the box opened with a sigh, as if relieved to have its secret told. Inside, on a bed of crimson silk so faded it looked almost brown, lay a fragment of wood no larger than a finger joint. Dark, splintered, unremarkable, except for the way the man's breath caught the moment it met the air. "The true cross," he whispered. Eleanor's own breath faltered. She had read of relics claimed to be such. Dozens scattered across the world, their authenticity disputed, their histories tangled in politics and piety. But this one, had a provenance written in blood, Aldric's blood. "You understand now why it can't leave," the man said, almost pleading. "Wars have been fought for less. Kingdoms would burn if they believed this was real." She looked down at the fragment, her mind turning over every scrap of research, every coded reference in Brother Mathieu's chronicle. If this was the relic taken from Constantinople, carried through Jerusalem, hidden by the order of the Golden Keepers, then Aldric had died not for gold, but for faith. And faith, she realized, was worth far more to the wrong kind of men. A sound echoed from beyond the chamber. Footsteps, multiple, approaching fast. The man in the charcoal coat swore under his breath. "They followed you." Eleanor's pulse spiked. She slipped the fragment back into the box and closed it, sliding it into her satchel in one smooth motion. "Then we move," she said. He hesitated, then nodded. They darted through the fortress's crumbling corridors, the narrow passageways twisting like a labyrinth designed to confuse. Behind them, voices barked orders in a language Eleanor didn't recognize. At the gate of the betrayer, they burst into the open desert. The wind had risen, carrying sheets of sand that blurred the horizon. Eleanor's lungs burned as they ran, the satchel thudding against her hip, the weight inside it feeling heavier with each step. "Where are we going?" she shouted over the wind. "Somewhere they won't follow," he replied. But his eyes told her he wasn't certain such a place existed. They reached the jeep, just as the first pursuers appeared in the gate's shadow. The man gunned the engine, tires spitting sand, the fortress shrinking behind them until it vanished into the storm. Eleanor gripped the satchel to her chest. The reality settling over her like a second skin. She now carried a relic people would kill for without hesitation. And there would be no hiding from what came next. The man glanced at her, his jaw tight. "If you want to live, you'll give it to me when we stop." She met his gaze. "If you wanted me dead, you'd have left me in that chamber." The wind howled around them. Neither of them looked away. Weeks later, the desert still clung to Eleanor's dreams. She would wake to the phantom sting of sand against her face, the echo of footsteps chasing her through the fortress's narrow halls. But in those moments between sleep and waking, she would also feel the faint weight of the wooden box in her hands, real enough to make her heart race before she remembered where it now lay. The fragment of the true cross was no longer in her possession. She had made sure of that. 3 days after escaping the fortress, she and the man in the charcoal coat, whose name she finally learned was Gabriel, had reached the coast. They spent a night in a weathered stone monastery perched above the sea, its cloisters open to the salt wind. There, over bitter coffee and the muffled hum of evening prayers, Gabriel told her what it meant to be a keeper. "They're not an order anymore," he said. just a lineage. Men and women bound by oath to protect the reliquary from the world, and the world from the reliquary. We don't always agree on methods. Some would have killed you without hesitation. And you? She had asked. He'd given her a tired smile. I thought you might understand what it costs to guard a truth. The cost had become clear soon after. They were followed even to the monastery gates, the same voices from the fortress shouting in the darkness before retreating. Gabriel knew then they couldn't keep the fragment anywhere predictable. In the end, Eleanor had been the one to suggest it. The reliquary would vanish into a vault beneath the monastery, sealed and unmarked, its existence known only to a handful of monks sworn to silence. She would keep the map, a piece of history without the power to ignite wars, and the world would remain ignorant of the relic's survival. She remembered the moment they placed the box on the stone altar in the monastery's crypt. The air was cool and dry, the candles flickering as if uneasy. Gabriel bowed his head, murmuring something in Latin before stepping back. When the monks lowered the slab to seal it, Eleanor felt an odd ache, part relief, part grief. Now, back in her city, the archive basement felt both smaller and infinitely safer. The map lay in her desk drawer, sealed in its sleeve, the gold chalice glinting faintly under the desk lamp. No one had come knocking at her door since her return. No shadows lingered outside her window, yet she knew the quiet wouldn't last forever. Secrets like this had a way of surfacing, no matter how deep they were buried. And when they did, someone would remember the quiet archivist who once walked into the desert and returned with a story she refused to tell. Sometimes, when she was alone in the reading room, she would take the map out and trace the gate of the betrayer with her fingertip. She thought of Aldric de Montfort, hunted, bleeding, determined, and of Gabriel's weary smile. Both had chosen to protect something that could never belong to them. In that, she realized, they had given her a lesson far greater than any relic could offer. History wasn't just about what we uncover. It was about what we choose to guard, even when the world demands we give it up. She replaced the map in the drawer and turned the key, the click echoing softly in the stillness. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph. Outside, the evening rain began to fall, washing the streets clean. Eleanor watched from the window, her reflection faint in the glass. Somewhere, far away, a relic slept in the dark. And for now, that was enough.